What I just done read.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to What I Done Just Read. My name is Max, and this is a book review show for... Hello? No, I thought I heard somebody speaking one word repeatedly, as dogs tend to do. Obviously not. It wasn't you, was it? No? Okay. Sorry, what was I saying? Oh yes, hello. Yes, this is my book review show where I have my list that I have created of books that I've been meaning to read for some time, and I've been working my way through it slowly and just giving you my first impressions of the books on the list. For this one, we've gone a little bit further down the list. We're down here to The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. Before we come on to that, we will be doing our word of the day, and this one is a nice and simple one, and it's not actually our word of the day, nor is it our word of tomorrow. It's actually our word of the day after tomorrow, or overmorrow. As somebody who is terribly guilty of using 50 words when 5 will do, I'm slightly taken by the fact that there is a single word which seems to have fallen out of common usage in favour of a 4-word expression. But that is it. Overmorrow means the day after tomorrow. It is a very old English word. Apparently its first recorded usage was in 1535. And why it's fallen out of common usage, I don't know. But please do join me in trying to bring this wonderful word back into the common verbiage, because it does deserve it. With that out of the way, we will have a look at the book in question for today. So the book in question, as I said, is The Man Who Was Thursday, if you can see that. Sorry, this one came without a dust jacket, which, as we're talking about the physical product itself, we will start there, is it's a decent enough book, you know, it's reasonably well, the print in it is pretty nice. I suppose I was a little bit disappointed, not so much that there wasn't a dust jacket, couldn't give a toss, but by the fact that this one has been stamped several times as a file copy from wherever it originally came from. I suppose we should be lucky that it's only been stamped a couple of times. The author himself, G.K. Chesterton, was born in May 1874 and was an author, a journalist, a philosopher, a lay theologian, and an art critic as well, like so many people of his generation. For most of his life he was an Anglican Protestant, but converted to Catholicism towards the end of his life, about 15 years after this book was written in 1808. Well, we'll come a bit more onto that in a bit. According to his Wikipedia page, he was a prolific writer. In his lifetime, he wrote something like 80 books, well over 100 poems, about 200 short stories, somewhere in the region of about 4,000 essays, many of which in the form of newspaper articles, as well as several plays. He was also known for engaging in kind of public debates, especially with some of his contemporaries as well, most notably Bertrand Russell, George Bernard Shaw, and H.G. Wells as well. Today he's most remembered as the creator of the ecclesiastical detective Father Brown, as well as this work and another one of his works as well, which was called The Napoleon of Notting Hill. As a man, apparently he was the kind of person that you'd know if you'd met him. He was something of a giant of a man, standing at about 6'4" and weighing over 20 stone. One of the things I found quite notable, quite amusing when I was doing a bit of research on Chesterton, was that in one of his public exchanges with his friend George Bernard Shaw, on meeting him, Chesterton said to Shaw, "To look at you, sir, anyone would think that England was suffering from a famine." To which Shaw, with all his erudite wit, responded straight away, "And to look at you, sir, anyone would think you had caused it." Sorry, I'm going to have to, because that was... it's just... You can just imagine the scene. Oh, dear. Excuse me one moment. Apparently also in his autobiography, Chesterton noted that in the early days of cinema, both he and Shaw appeared as cowboys in a silent film, apparently, that was never released. Which, that would be fantastic. If anybody has, if the footage still exists, it would just be a wonderful thing to see. I will have a look and see if there is anything like on the Tube of You, if somebody's uploaded that. If I can, I'll see if I can stick a little bit of that on here, but I can't guarantee. Chesterton died on the 14th of June 1936 at his home in Buckinghamshire of consumptive heart failure, I believe it is. Check my notes because I did write it down because I wanted to get it right. Congestive heart failure, excuse me. As to the book itself, so The Man Who Was Thursday, which is called The Man Who Was Thursday, A Nightmare, was published in 1908. As you can see, this time I can't go to the blurb on the back because no dust jacket. So, very simple synopsis. The story follows the adventures of Gabriel Sim, who is ostensibly a poet, who has been co-opted into a very select branch of Scotland Yard, tasked with the prevention of what Chesterton describes as intellectual crime. By that, it's kind of a fancy way of saying anarchism. More to do with anarchy for its own sake, which the way it's described at the start of the book is quite fascinating, especially when viewed from a modern world context. He cites things that we see echoes of today. Things that he refers to the intellectual criminal who will tear down a system not because there was anything inherently wrong with it, but simply because the system exists. I would refer you to such movements as defund the police and things like that. And he does spend some time quite nicely pointing out that the common criminal still actively supports the system. They break the system because of necessities within the sphere of their lives, as opposed to the intellectual criminal who will rail against society for society's own sake, which I thought was quite interesting. He does quite rightly cite things that would have been relevant to the time, things like the Irish question, and by extension the Dynamiters, which his fictitious anarchist movement do sometimes refer to themselves as well. Although I do wonder whether Chesterton had considered or what he would make of the fact that his organisation, which devolves into two distinct councils, the Central Anarchists Council, which the acronym of which would be CAC, and their ruling body, the Supreme Anarchists Council, or SAC. I hope that he would find that kind of amusing, although I don't think it was on purpose. When the story is set is a little bit ambiguous. I mean, some of the reviews of this seem to suggest that it's set in Victorian England. I feel like it's more set when it was published in like the late Edwardian period, around 1908, 1910. This inclusion of motorised vehicles in it suggests their prevalence being higher than I would have expected it to be, even in the latter half of the Victorian era. Is it any good? Right. The book itself is generally described as both a psychological thriller, a work of fantastical literature, but also as a Christian allegory, which again that part of it we'll come on to in a bit. The work itself is likened to other more absurdist works and writers as well, like for example the works of Kafka, the works of Borges, and also to a lesser degree I think the works of some of the works of Lewis Carroll as well. And I can see why there's elements in there. There is some wonderfully well realised and well thought out humour in here, and quite intelligent humour as well. A lot of which I would actually also say is very much in the vein of Nicolas Gogol as well. And I think that's kind of borne out in the book, because one of the characters in here is only ever referred to as Gogol. So I do kind of feel like that was Chesterton going, this is kind of where I got some of my inspiration from. I must say, I mean, it's going to be a bit of a weird one, this, in terms of how I processed my my review of it, in that I wasn't convinced. I'm not convinced by it. How can I best put it? All of the elements of a piece of absurdist literature are here, but the glue that holds them together may not have been of the best quality. And again, that's no disrespect to Chesterton. He was obviously a very accomplished and very respected writer, but it feels more manufactured than composed, shall we say. Which is curious, because certainly when you get towards the end of the book, there's elements of the way the story develops and the way it's written develops that makes me wonder if this might have actually worked better as an epic poem than as a piece of prose. As I said, there's some wonderful and very clever, humorous elements to it. As I said, very much in the mould of Gogol. And that's, I think, is a large part of my problem with this, is that they're quite few and far between. They kind of come into the book quite early on in the first third of the book, and it starts to build up, and then it just disappears. And those kind of elements kind of appear sporadically through the book, less and less. And what there is there in place of it, for me, I didn't feel was strong enough to carry the work, where those really, really wonderful and very well thought out passages of humour and characterisation exist. And that's a shame. That is a real shame. As I say, I mean, this has been likened to things like Kafka, most notably The Castle, which I thought was quite interesting, because I've read The Castle, and I must admit, of Kafka's works, that was the one that I found the most difficult to get on with. I found The Castle very dense, and it took me ages to read it. to have to really kind of persevere to get through it. I mean, obviously, The Castle is a lot longer than this, but I find it interesting that that's the one that they should compare it to. There are, as the story progresses, some elements of almost slapstick that kind of creeps into it. But, again, coming back to this analogy of comparing it to the likes of Kafka, those elements feel more, for me, they felt more Keystone Cops than, say, The Trial. Which is a shame. I think the other part as well that I really struggle with is our main character, is Gabriel Sim, who is, again, at the start of the book, is just so wonderfully realised, and he comes across as being very erudite, very confident and competent and capable as a protagonist. And yet, for no other reason than that the plot requires him to be so, almost on the turn of a dime, he becomes like a blithering novice, completely out of his depth, and it just creates an inconsistent protagonist, which, again, because so much of the really nice and interesting character stuff is from him, it undermines it, and I found that it took me out of what could and should be a very wonderful and, if slightly disturbing, a narrative, which is what I think Chesterton had in mind, which is a shame. And then we get towards the end of the story, we get to what I mentioned a couple of times there, the other thing that this is referred to as a Christian allegory. And yes, once you've finished the book and you sit back and look at it as a whole, you can see that moral message was there from the start, but the way it's handled in the story itself, it's like it's shoehorned in at the 11th hour. And I think for us today, in a much more secular world, you kind of go, oh, is that it? And I think that's something that we can't do anything about. That's just simply a question of the age in which that I'm reading it, unfortunately. Irrespective of the fact that I had a religious upbringing, that it doesn't change the fact that who I am today, and I think who most readers are today, will kind of go, okay, yeah, it's indicative of its time, early 20th century, fair enough, but it doesn't have the same impact. I have no real problem with... Well, actually, no, that's not true. I do have a bit of a problem with overtly religious texts because of my own personal beliefs, but I do think that there is a place for religious philosophical texts, but I just think there are better ones than this. If you wanted something that is quite clearly religious in its overtones and yet still presents a viable philosophy on life, I would direct you to, again, arguably one of the best that you can find, which is the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, which is vastly superior. But there you go. It's a shame. I mean, on doing a bit of research on this for this review, The Man Who Was Thursday has a lot of high praise, especially from, again, Chesterton's contemporaries and from critics at the time and since. I do wonder if it's because it's an English work of fantastical literature, which at the time was a genre that was still very much dominated by predominantly European authors. I do wonder if this got praised a little bit higher than it actually deserved to be, purely out of patriotism. Again, I don't know. That's pure supposition on my part. If you disagree with me, please let me know. Ultimately, I was a little disappointed. Again, there's some wonderful elements in it. I'm kind of finding different ways here to say the same thing, I suppose, that it could have been better, and I'd hoped for more from it. The good stuff in here is really good, and you can see that Chesterton knew his business, and even the bits that I say that are reminiscent of the likes of Gogol, there is enough of the author's own stamp on them that they makes them seem fresh and his own take on those. Would I recommend reading this? Yes. I think you'd get more out of it if it is a genre that you are looking to get into. I would certainly recommend reading this before reading pretty much anything by any of the other authors that I've mentioned there, because they do similar things, but they do it a lot better. And I think you'll feel a bit shortchanged if you go off and read Kafka or read Gogol, if you read anything like The Nose, or, as I've mentioned, the one I've mentioned before, The Overcoat, or anything like that. If you read those, and then you came back and read this, I think you'd feel a little bit shortchanged. I don't know. I mean, I know Kingsley Amis said that he read this book every year, and I must admit, I tend to see more in a book on second reading than I do on first, but that's not what this show is about. The show is about my first impressions of it. So maybe I'll come back to it in a year's time and reread it and see how I feel about it then. If that's something that you'd like to see me do, then please do let me know in the comments below. But for now, I'm going to put that to one side, and we are going to go to the jar of eyes, and we are going to stick this... Well, you know what I'm going to do, because I do it every month. Before I do, as I said, as you can see here, I have done what I said I was going to do last time. I have corrected these, so I've put the kind of more average eye for my for the quality of the products for each of the books that I've read, so that I can still keep the big eye in case we get one that is an actual standout piece of publishing in terms of the artifact itself. Yes, so if I can get away with it, in the words of Chuck Berry's lesser known cousin, "Don't nobody go nowhere." this one. I'm just building up suspense. There you go. So, our I ratings for The Man Who Was Thursday is a very average, double average eyes. It's a reasonable product, but as I said, slightly disappointed. Enjoyable, but not great. Fortunately, sorry. The other part of this as well, as it's very important, is we can... Sharpie. We can cross The Man Who Was Thursday off the list. And we can have a look at what is next. And next we're going to go back to the top, to this little bit here, which is... this is one that I did think about doing for the kind of sister show that I've been doing with this, which is just for patrons, because it's an anthology. But we're going to be looking at the 27th Pan Book of Horror Stories. Yes, I know it seems a bit strange to drop in at number 27. I will explain more about that when I get to doing my review of this. It is a collection that I have been building up slowly, and I have the first 27, oddly enough. Maybe I should put them out here, I don't know. Maybe for next time I'll have them all on display, we'll see. But, so this will be the next thing I'm reading. I'm probably not going to go in and do a review of every story in it. I'll probably pick out a few on there. But that's kind of where we are. As I said, I'm sorry if this one's a little bit subdued, but I'm still not 100%. I was going to say, in the words of the performing chef, the show must gouge on. On that note, I am going to say it is time for you to get thee gone, and I'm going to get on with this. Bye-bye. The ruling body, the Supreme Anarchists Council, or SAC.